It was 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning when Thomas McCarthy heard the first gunshot echo through the fifth-floor hallway of the Riverside Financial Building. He was 63 years old, wearing a faded blue janitor's uniform, pushing a mop bucket past the break room. Most people in the office didn't even know his name. They called him the old guy or the cleaning man. Some didn't call him anything at all. Just 3 days earlier, the VP of Operations had told him, in front of a room full of younger employees, that he was too old for this job and that the company was looking into automation options. Thomas had nodded quietly, picked up his cleaning cart, and walked away. He didn't argue. He never argued. But that morning, when the gunshots started and everyone else froze in terror, Thomas McCarthy became the only person who moved. The shooter was a former employee, fired 6 months ago, angry at the company, armed with a semi-automatic handgun. He entered through the stairwell, walked calmly into the main office floor, and fired 2 shots into the ceiling. 200 people worked on that floor. Accountants, managers, assistants, interns. Most of them were young. Most of them had never heard a gunshot in real life. They screamed. They ducked under desks. They ran toward the back offices, trying to find somewhere to hide. And in the chaos, the shooter walked slowly down the center aisle, looking for someone specific, someone who had signed his termination papers, someone who was now hiding behind a locked door on the far side of the floor. Thomas was in the storage closet when it started. He heard the shots, he heard the screaming, and instead of locking himself inside like any reasonable person would have done, he opened the door and stepped into the hallway. He saw the shooter's back, saw the gun in his hand, saw the trail of terror he was leaving behind him, and Thomas made a decision. He didn't think about his age. He didn't think about the fact that he had no training, no weapon, no backup. He thought about the 200 people on that floor, people who had ignored him for years, people who had laughed at him just days ago, and he thought, I'm the only one who can stop this. What happened next lasted less than 3 minutes, but it changed everything. Thomas didn't run toward the shooter. He didn't yell or try to tackle him. He did something smarter. He used the one thing he had that no one else in that building had. 30 years of experience working in that exact space. He knew every door, every hallway, every blind corner. He knew where the emergency exits were. He knew which doors locked from the inside and which ones didn't. And he used that knowledge to do something no one expected. He got ahead of the shooter. He cut him off before he could reach the executive offices. And when the gunman turned the corner and found Thomas standing in his way, unarmed, calm, and looking him straight in the eyes, something shifted. Thomas McCarthy didn't save the day with violence. He didn't disarm the shooter with some action hero move. He saved 200 lives by doing what he had always done, showing up, staying calm, and refusing to give up. This is the story of the man they called too old for this job. The man who proved that experience, courage, and a quiet refusal to run can be more powerful than anything else. And if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told you don't belong, this story is for you. Thomas McCarthy had been working at Riverside Financial for 32 years. He started in 1991, right after his discharge from the Army. He wasn't a combat veteran. He'd been a logistics specialist, managing supplies and schedules on a base in Virginia. But he'd learned discipline, patience, and how to stay calm under pressure. When he got out, he needed work. Riverside was hiring janitors. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady. He took the job. He showed up every day. He did his work without complaints. And over 3 decades, he became invisible. People stopped seeing him. He was just part of the building, like the walls or the elevators. And Thomas was fine with that. He didn't need recognition. He needed a paycheck and health insurance. He had a wife at home, Linda, who had early-onset Parkinson's. His salary paid for her medications, her physical therapy, her care. So he kept his head down and did his job, even when people treated him like he didn't exist. But things had been changing at Riverside over the past few years. The company was modernizing. That's what the executives called it. They were cutting costs, automating processes, replacing older employees with younger ones who would work for less. Thomas had watched it happen to others. The 60-year-old accountant who got laid off and replaced by software. The 58-year-old security guard who was told his position was redundant. And then, 3 weeks ago, Thomas got called into a meeting with the VP of Operations, a man named Derek Paulson. Derek was 34, wore expensive suits and talked fast. He told Thomas, in front of 3 other junior managers, that the company was exploring robotic cleaning solutions and that Thomas's role might not be necessary much longer. Then Derek smiled and said, "No offense, Tom, but you're too old for this job. We need people who can keep up with the pace we're setting here." Thomas didn't say anything. He nodded. He stood up. He walked out. But inside, something broke. Not because he was angry. Thomas wasn't the type to get angry. But because for the first time in 32 years, he felt disposable. Like all those years of showing up, all those early mornings and late nights, didn't matter. Like he was just an old man in the way. He went home that night and told Linda what had happened. She held his hand and said, "They don't know what they have." And Thomas tried to believe her, but deep down, he wasn't sure anymore. Maybe Derek was right. Maybe he was too old. Maybe he didn't belong there anymore. 3 days later, on that Tuesday morning, Thomas was mopping the 5th-floor hallway when he heard the gunshots. 2 loud cracks that echoed through the building like thunder, then screaming, then chaos. Thomas dropped his mop and moved toward the sound, not away from it, toward it, because that's what 32 years of showing up every day had taught him. When something's wrong, you don't run, you move toward the problem. You fix it. He stepped into the main office floor and saw people diving under desks, running toward the back exits, crying into their phones. And at the far end of the room, walking slowly down the center aisle, was a man with a gun. Thomas recognized him immediately. His name was Ethan Reeves. He'd been fired 6 months ago for performance issues and threatening behavior. Thomas remembered him because Ethan used to yell at the cleaning staff, throw trash on the floor on purpose, make their jobs harder. And now Ethan was back, and he was armed. If you're finding this story powerful, hit the like button and subscribe. We tell real-life hero stories about ordinary men who face impossible situations and refuse to give up. If you've ever felt invisible, underestimated, or told you're not enough, these stories are for you. And if you want more, drop a comment below telling us, have you ever stood up when everyone else ran? Now let's get back to Thomas, because things are about to get intense. Thomas watched Ethan fire another shot into the air. It wasn't random. It was calculated. Ethan wanted everyone terrified. He wanted control, and it was working. People were screaming, hiding, frozen in fear. Thomas looked around. Security hadn't arrived yet. The police hadn't been called. Most people were too panicked to even pull out their phones. And Ethan was walking steadily toward the executive offices at the back of the floor. Thomas knew what that meant. Ethan was looking for someone specific, probably Derek Paulson, the VP who had signed his termination papers. And if Ethan got to that office, people were going to die. Thomas made a decision in that moment. A decision that had nothing to do with heroism and everything to do with the same thing he'd been doing for 32 years, showing up and doing the job no one else wanted to do. He didn't run at Ethan. That would have been suicide. Instead, Thomas moved along the outer edge of the office floor, using cubicle walls and columns for cover. He knew this building better than anyone. He knew there was a service hallway that connected to the executive wing, a narrow passage used by cleaning staff and maintenance crews. If he could get there first, he could cut Ethan off before he reached the offices. Thomas moved fast, but quietly. His heart was pounding, His hands were shaking, but his mind was clear. He'd been in tense situations before. Not like this, obviously, but he'd spent years staying calm when things broke down, when systems failed, when people panicked. And right now, staying calm was the only thing that mattered. He reached the service hallway and pushed through the door. It was dark, narrow, filled with cleaning supplies and electrical panels. Thomas ran down it as fast as his 63-year-old legs would carry him. His knees hurt, his breath was short, but he didn't stop. He burst out the other end and found himself standing directly in front of the door to Derek Paulson's office. He could hear Ethan on the other side of the floor, still walking, still shouting. Thomas had maybe 30 seconds before Ethan got there. He didn't have a weapon, he didn't have backup, but he had something else. He had a choice. He could lock himself in the office and hope Ethan gave up. Or he could do what every instinct in his body was screaming at him not to do. He could stand in the way. Thomas stepped into the center of the hallway, right in front of the office door. He stood there, arms at his sides, breathing hard. And he waited. 10 seconds later, Ethan turned the corner. He saw Thomas standing there, and he stopped. For a moment, the two men just stared at each other. Ethan raised the gun, pointing it directly at Thomas's chest, and Thomas didn't move. He didn't flinch. He just looked Ethan in the eyes and said, in a calm, steady voice, "You don't want to do this." Ethan's hand was shaking, his face was red, his eyes wild. But for the first time since he'd entered the building, he hesitated. And in that hesitation, Thomas saw something. Ethan didn't really want to hurt anyone. He was angry, he was desperate, but he wasn't a killer. Not yet. Thomas took a slow step forward. "I remember you, Ethan," he said. "You worked here. You had a hard time. I get it. But this won't fix anything." Ethan's grip on the gun tightened. "You don't know anything about me," he said, his voice breaking. "No one here knows anything about me. They threw me out like I was nothing." Thomas nodded. "I know that feeling," he said. 3 days ago they told me I was too old for this job, that I didn't matter, that I was replaceable. I know exactly how you feel." And for the first time, Ethan's hand lowered slightly. Not all the way, but enough. Thomas kept talking. "But you walking in here with a gun, that's not going to make them respect you. It's just going to prove them right. You're better than this. I know you are." Behind Thomas, inside the office, he could hear Derek and the other executives breathing heavily, hiding behind a locked door. Behind Ethan, 200 people were still hiding, still terrified. And Thomas McCarthy, the 63-year-old janitor who everyone said was too old for this job, stood between them. The police arrived 4 minutes later. They came through the stairwell, fully armed, ready to engage. But when they reached the 5th floor, they found something they didn't expect. They found Ethan Reeves sitting on the floor, his gun on the ground beside him, hands on his head. And they found Thomas McCarthy standing over him, calm, exhausted, but still on his feet. The officers moved in quickly, cuffing Ethan and securing the weapon. One of them asked Thomas what had happened. Thomas just shrugged and said, "We talked." That was it. No dramatics, no big speech. He'd done what needed to be done. And now it was over. The paramedics checked him for injuries. He had none. The officers took his statement. He answered every question clearly and patiently. And then, once the floor was secure and people started coming out of hiding, something changed. At first, it was just a few people. A young accountant named Maria, who had been hiding under her desk, walked up to Thomas and said, "Thank you." Then an intern named Kyle did the same. Then more. One by one, people who had ignored Thomas for years, people who had never even learned his name, came up to him with tears in their eyes and thanked him. Some hugged him, some just stood there, unable to speak. And Thomas, who had spent 32 years being invisible, suddenly felt seen. Not because he wanted attention, but because, for the first time, people understood what he'd been all along. Someone who showed up, someone who stayed, someone who didn't run. Derek Paulson came out of his office 20 minutes later, pale and shaking. He looked at Thomas for a long time. Then he walked over and said, "I was wrong about what I said. You're not too old. You saved my life." Thomas looked at him and nodded. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't gloat. He just said, "I did my job." Derek opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out, because they both knew the truth. Thomas had done more than his job. He'd done what no one else could. And it had nothing to do with age. It had everything to do with character. The media picked up the story within hours. Hero janitor stops armed gunman at office building. The local news interviewed Thomas that evening. He didn't want to do it, but Linda convinced him. On camera, the reporter asked him, "What made you step in front of that gun?" And Thomas thought about it for a moment. Then he said, "I've been doing this job for 32 years. And in all that time, I learned one thing. When something needs fixing, you don't wait for someone else to do it. You do it yourself." The interview went viral. Within days, Thomas was being called a hero across the country, but the thing that mattered most to him wasn't the attention. It was what happened the next Monday when he went back to work. He walked into Riverside Financial, expecting things to be the same. But when he stepped off the elevator onto the 5th floor, everyone stopped what they were doing, and they clapped, all 200 of them. Standing ovation. Thomas stood there, embarrassed, overwhelmed, trying to wave them off, but they didn't stop. And in that moment, Thomas McCarthy, the man they'd called too old, the man they'd ignored for decades, realized something. He'd never been invisible. He'd always been exactly what they needed. They just hadn't noticed until it mattered most. This is the story of Thomas McCarthy, a 63-year-old janitor who was told he was too old for his job, and then proved that experience, courage, and a refusal to run are worth more than anything else. He didn't save 200 lives because he was young, fast, or trained. He saved them because he showed up, because he stayed calm, because when everyone else froze, he moved. And that's the lesson here. Age doesn't determine your value. Your willingness to act does. Your refusal to give up does. The quiet decision to stand in the way when no one else will. That's what makes a hero. If this story moved you, share it with someone who's ever been told they're too old, too slow, or not enough. And tell us in the comments, have you ever been underestimated only to prove everyone wrong? We want to hear your story. Because the world needs more people like Thomas. People who don't wait for permission to do the right thing. People who show up, even when no one's watching. And people who refuse to believe that their best days are behind them. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more real-life hero stories about older men who face impossible odds and come out the other side. These are the stories no one else is telling, and they matter. See you in the next one.